Schmidt. Okay, what is your name?
My name is Brian Schmidt.
Okay. What would be if you could change something in Delmar, what would it be?
If I could change something in Delmar, it would be that when I grew up, when I was younger, there were a number of different businesses in town. And it'd be, if I could change something, it'd be that there'd be more businesses that would come into the community here.
Okay. How long have you lived here?
I actually live just south of town. Where I live is just south of town. I farm. I farmed all my life. And I'm about 2.5 miles south of town. But I've lived there my entire life, outside of 4 years while I was attending college.
What brought you and your family to Delmar?
My great-grandfather, back in 1914, purchased the farm where we're on. My family immigrated from Germany back in the 1860s, and so it was through family ties. My great-grandfather was a farmer, my grandfather was a farmer, my dad farmed this ground, and now I am.
Why did you move here?
Well, I didn't actually move here, so I lived here all my life, and as I said, my family put roots here and have always enjoyed not just the countryside, but the city of Delmar also too. A lot of ties here.
What was life like in Delmar when you were growing up?
When I grew up, Delmar was there was probably more people here, and like I said earlier, there's more businesses in town. I attended school here through 8th grade, and when I grew up, I played baseball just like kids do today. When I grew up, there was still a train that went through town here. The depot is still here, but there were still train tracks, and I remember the train going through. We raised cattle, and often at that time, the cattle were sold in Chicago. The cattle market was in Chicago. So occasionally, I remember I would ride the train into Chicago to see the cattle sold. So obviously that's not here, but those are things I remember growing up around here.
When you were young, what was your favorite thing to do after school?
When I was young, my favorite thing to do was we'd get together with the neighborhood guys and play football or whatever. Mostly, depending on the season, if it was fall, we'd play football just in somebody's backyard. We'd play baseball out here in the diamond beside the school. After school, we just kind of got together and whatever, if the weather was fit, or even if it wasn't fit, we'd play football during the rain. And I remember that's what we do.
What are your favorite memories from growing up?
Well, my favorite memories from growing up, as I said, one I remember is riding a train out of town here. Just the guys that I grew up with, and as I said, we spent time after school and during school. We'd get together, and during recess out here at the playground, I remember we would play during the recess, and we would go. Really, I know the number of times I would just walked home from here. It's about 2.5 miles, and I just walk home from school occasionally, not often, because there were buses. We still had buses to ride to take us home, but occasionally, if the weather was nice, we'd just walk home and just talk and share stories and kind of plan our next. Sometimes we'd go fishing in the creeks around too, because there were a number of fish in the creeks at that time, not so much anymore. But we did that.
What is special about Delmar to you?
What's special about Delmar to me is everybody seemed like a family. Everybody, even though it's different families, and everybody is within, it's a small town, always has been, but everybody seemed to reasonably know everybody. Sometimes, sometimes that didn't work out because everybody knew you couldn't keep any secrets. But if anybody needed any help, and that wasn't just if you were in town, if you were just around the town like we were, people were there to help out. And that's what was always important to me.
How has Delmar changed over time?
Delmar's changed over time. As I said, one thing that's really kind of distressed me, I guess, is just there were a number of businesses. We had a grocery store. I remember even a dance hall that was in the park. There used to be a dance hall there, and really when I was in kindergarten, there was where Grossman Hall is now. There was an older building there that really at that time that's where I went down. The school was right here, and I came up here for elementary classes, but kindergarten was at that, they call it the parochial hall, and went down there, and that's where classes were then. Well, that's been torn down. Grossman Hall's there now. But as far as changes, there was a grocery store, there was a hardware store. Now the only really business in town is outside of the Casey's or the grain elevator, and that's essentially the banks, I guess, on the west side of town. But there has always been a bank in town. But that's what's really changed over the years that I've noticed, and it seems like more times that people who are here, they live here, they live in the community, but they work someplace else. So that wasn't always the case here in town.
Okay. What were the downtown buildings like before they were empty?
Well, like I said, there was a grocery store. The way things were, or the way the buildings were downtown before, there was a grocery store in one corner. There was always kind of a tavern, a bar around. Seems like that's a mainstay. But there was a hardware across the street. There was an insurance agency across the street from the grocery store, and the city hall was kind of really where it's at now. But I remember in August, I was a 4-H leader here in town for, I'm not sure, 12, 15 years. And we started a local club show, and we had the show right downtown, right on Main Street, and we used one of the buildings from the grain elevator for the calves and the hogs, and there was not too many sheep to put them in, and then we showed the show was right on the street, just off the Main Street here in town. So that was always a big time because there was a big crowd, and it was usually in August. Or early August, and that's something that obviously we don't have anymore either, and so that changed. And that was always held downtown.
What would you like to do over the weekend in Delmar?
What would I like to do over the weekend in Delmar? I still like to play baseball. I mean, it's a great ball diamond here. And I know sometimes when we have the Labor Day. One other thing, I guess, when I graduated from college, I came back, and we started a Lions Club here in town in 1979, I think it was. And that group always was mainly focused on building up things here in the community and helped with different functions. One of the things, they now have the car show. The car show is like on Labor Day weekend. And they'd always have a kickball. They'd play kickball here at the Ball Diamond then during that. So on a weekend, I mean, that's what I want to enjoy, coming into town to, again, get together. Even though I'm 60 years old, I still enjoy doing it.
What memories do you have about when do you have about when you were 16?
when I was 16.
Like around 15, 16.
What memories do I have around when I was 16 years old? So I would have been like a sophomore in high school, and I started going to school in DeWitt at the time, because like I say, 8th grade was my last year here in the Delwood School District, and I started attending DeWitt School, because I was really right on the edge of their district. And it was kind of a difficult time for me, I guess, because I was leaving behind a lot of friends that I had here, and making new friends down in DeWitt. And I still am friends with all those guys that I grew up with, and at least the ones that still stay around here. Doug Goodall, Jerry Kossel, he was my neighbor, and he's passed away now. But there's a number of guys here in town that I grew up. Steve Jepson, who just was in the hallway when I came in. Steve was in the class ahead of me, and I knew all those guys when I was going to school here in Delmar. But when I started going to school in DeWitt, I didn't see him as much anymore. And so that was an adjustment for me to kind of leave behind, or not leave behind, but maybe set aside some friends I knew all my life up until that time, and then make new ones in a different school district.
What did you do when you were a little kid?
When I was a little kid, what I mainly did, growing up on a farm, I always had chores to do. I had something that, even though, no matter how old I was, and as I can remember, before I was 10 years old, I was driving a tractor. And, but we had cattle, we raised cattle, and I had chores to do as far as maybe feeding the smaller calves, making sure the little things were done, and we always had those to do before we did anything else. And I have a brother and a sister that were both younger than me, and so I'm the oldest, and I guess I was the one given the duty of making sure my brother, and especially my brother, was helping too. So that's kind of what I did when I was younger. And like I say, I lived on the farm, and had special duties, but again, with the neighbor guys, Jerry Kossel, Dave Dinger, we'd get together, and there's other guys, we'd get together, and sometimes we'd go hunting too, occasionally, when I was older a bit, but we'd go fishing in the creek too.
Okay, can you tell me about the time when you were on the farm?
Can I tell you about a time that I was on the farm? Yeah, there's we always had cattle. We always had cows around, and I just remember we were really busy in the summertime. The summertime when we were especially harvesting hay, storing up hay for the cattle during the wintertime, and taking care of the crops as they're growing through the summertime. It was always busy, but even the winter times were busy too, because we still had cattle to take care of and feed, and then we start calving. We usually start calving in January, so usually most will wait till March, April, when it's warmer. We always did in January, so it was especially busy then, because it usually wasn't warm, and if a calf was born when it was really cold, we'd have to bring them inside the house and take them down to the basement to get them warmed up. Otherwise, they would freeze to death. So there really wasn't any downtime, but so we had lots of things to do all through the year.
Okay. Please share a memory or a story that explains or captures what Delmar is to you.
A story that captures what Delmar is to me. I guess there was when we were first having our first few meetings with the Lions Club, when we started forming a Lions Club here in Delmar, like I said, it was 1979. I was 22 years old. I just gotten, or 23 years old. I had just gotten out of college, and we met at Jan's Cafe downtown. That was just beside the hardware store downtown on the west side of Main Street. And it was one of our first few meetings, and we were trying to get some ideas of what we could do as far as a group to help with the community, what the community needed. And we found out that the Lions Clubs were involved with cornea transplants, cooperating with the University of Iowa, with the hospitals. And I remember there was a fellow, Brown, I can't think of his first name now, a younger guy too, and this fellow from another group, from another town, Goose Lake I think it was, came and talked about what the cornea transplant program was and how the Lions cooperated with that. And he gave the talk and presented how we could sign up to donate our corneas, the lens in our eye, for transplanting to people who can, to repair theirs. And I remember at the end, Richard Brown was his name. And he worked with the bank here in town at the time. And he looked really troubled after the whole presentation was over. And I remember talking with him afterwards. And he was bothered because he thought that the cornea transplant was something that you did right away. And he didn't want to give up his cornea, his eyes. And he'd mistaken it was when you pass away, so when you die, they provide it then, or donate it then. But he was really troubled because he was thinking, he wasn't too sure he wanted to do that. It was too big of a sacrifice, but he was just mistaken.
Hey Cassidy, I think we got time for maybe just one more question, so.
Okay. Finally, who is your favorite superhero?
Oh my. That's got to be my favorite superhero. It's got to be Thor. Got to be Thor, yeah. I know it's my wife's favorite, just because of the guy who plays the character. But I know that's kind of goes with the mascot, or the mascot here at Delwood. And I remember some friends around from Delmar here that visited our house one night, late one night. We really, my wife and I were in bed, and they came out. They were dressed up as Thor, and had the helmet just like with the horns on his head. And we're outside of the dogs were barking, and they were outside of our bed, or outside our bedroom. But yeah, I'd say Thor is my favorite superhero.
Mine would have to be Supergirl, Superman, or Batman.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I like Superman too. Yeah. Excellent.
I'm going to say thank you to Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. Very good questions.